Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today I am going to go over some pretty dense material regarding the beginning of the solar system and the history of Earth, and and the reason why it's so dense is because there's a lot of moving parts. So there's a lot of geology, early chemistry, how life is formed, even a little bit of mythology sprinkled in a little bit, and a lot of presentation of new evidence and a lot of presentation of the opposing argument as well. To get started, well, first of all, let's talk about the article. So the article comes from Wired, but it was republished by Wired. It actually comes from Quanta magazine, which is from the Simons Foundation. It's sponsored by the Simons Foundation, or it's a publication rather of the Simons Foundation. So Quanta magazine comes out with this really detailed, like I said, dense article, and it was republished by Wired, and that's how it caught my eye. And it's probably been republished by other outlets as well. So I spent a while looking through it and picking out some of the more juicy parts, I guess, the more important and striking parts to me. I'll have a link obviously in the description so you guys can have a read yourself. But I took out the parts that I thought were really interesting. And here are some of the quotes that I thought that might help set the tone for the video. So one of the quotes is, "Life might be able to withstand horrendous conditions much more readily than originally thought. There is no reason life could not have emerged at 4.3 billion years ago. Normally, we're taught that it takes billions of years for life to form, but it may be possible that life emerged within a few million years of when conditions became habitable." These were all really interesting quotes from one of the scientists, and I think you guys kind of can see where this is going. There's new evidence that supports our ancestors may be much older than we thought. Life may have arisen the moment the planet cooled enough to hold liquid water, and that's one of the keys of this article. That there's going to be a lot of stuff proposed and established in the article that I'll get to in a second. But one of the main parts is that at what point was Earth? Did they have water and a stable crust? That's one of the hot topics that are going to be covered. Actually, these quotes come from John Valley, who's a geochemist at the University of Wisconsin, and he has a lot of expertise in dating and examining some of these microfossils that I'll cover in a few minutes. And the main focus is that, or his main thesis is that these fossils imply that life diversified remarkably early. So think about the Cambrian explosion and go even further back than that. I did a video regarding the Cambrian explosion a few months ago, and I talk about how crazy it is that there was nothing and suddenly this huge explosion in the fossil record of all kinds of diverse life. And John Valley is saying that it diversified a while back, and he has some evidence to prove or to propose. There have been hot pokers of the theory for a long time in the academic, especially by geologists, and still it survived to this day. So I want to present some of that from this article for you guys and see what you guys think, and hopefully you guys tell me in the comments. Let's talk about the traditional tale for a second. What has been widely accepted without much alternative proposals that have been taken seriously until now. So the traditional tale talks about the Hadean era of primordial Earth history. So the Hadean era is named for the Greek god Hades, god of the underworld, fire and brimstone and all that. And that's sort of reflective of what was going on in this era. So during this time, the Earth was hellish, it was hot, inhospitable to life. It's marked by intense asteroid bombardment, which we'll get into a little bit later, but it's the late heavy bombardment or the lunar cataclysm. So during this time, there were two markedly noticeable bombardments. I guess a stage of heavy, intense asteroid impacts. One cluster, I guess you could say, was at the very beginning of the solar system, and then the other one was ended 3.8 billion years ago, which is what we're talking about here, the late heavy bombardment. And then after this, it wasn't until billions of years later that life could develop. So this is basically the traditional tale in a nutshell. Here's a nice infograph to look at that sort of talks that goes over this traditional timeline. So 4.55 billion years ago, here's the sun, or the Earth rather. So the Earth coalesces out of debris left over from the formation of the sun. 4.5 billion years ago, a planet-sized object smashes into Earth, leading to the moon. Now, this is what the Sumerians talked about. There's two planet-sized objects in the Sumerian, I guess, lore. It was Marduk and Tiamat, and I think Tiamat was the original Earth, I think. And then Marduk came and crashed into it, and then it created the moon. That story goes back thousands of years in human history. So that was part of this traditional tale. And then asteroids, 4.5 to 4.1 billion years ago, asteroids left over from the birth of the sun continue to pummel the early Earth, as you can see here. And then the late heavy bombardment happens 4.0 to 3.8 billion years ago. So for 200 million years, there was this bombardment happening. And then suddenly it stops. And I guess or it cools down rather. It tapers off. And then life is allowed to form. Now, another interesting thing about this infographic is, see this in the blue, the recent discoveries. So they're marked by these double helix icons. So it peppers these discoveries into the traditional timeline, and you can see if true, this contradicts that timeline, and we'd have to create a new model. So the oldest one goes back a little bit beyond 4.3 billion years, almost like 4.3.5 billion years ago, which call into question this late heavy bombardment and the formation and the age of the Earth. And I'm not saying anything. I'm not trying to bash the current timeline. I don't think these scientists are trying to bash the current timeline either, as sort of like a denouncing or anything. They're just trying to build on the timeline and trying to restructure it just to get closer to the truth, which is should be the aim of most scientists. So if these claims are true, and you see there's 3.7 billion as early as almost 3.5 billion years ago, then we have to factor these into the equation and then go forward from there. It can't just be swept under the rug or anything like that. And that's basically what the main goal is of not just this video, but of this article and all the awareness. Now, all these that are presented, maybe some of them aren't true. Maybe some of them are measured wrong, or maybe there's some mistake in the calculations or something. But they've been working on this for decades now, and they're still pretty convinced that they haven't made any mistakes. So a debate has to happen, and a debate has been happening. So I'm not presenting these without knowing that they've been scrutinized. These have been scrutinized plenty. So just know that as we go forward. So the new opinions now, to the contrary, is, if you haven't gathered already, the Earth may have been tepid and watery from the outset. So the oldest rocks in the geological record indicate parts of the Earth's crust had cooled and solidified by 4.4 billion years ago. So if we go back to the timeline, that would put us up here. So right around 4.4 billion years ago, they're saying that it might have been already cooled down. So there probably were stable crust already, and there probably was plenty of water. According to the ancient, or the original timeline, Marduk and Tiamat happened not even a billion years before, not even 100 million years before that. Yeah, so as you can see, there's a huge discrepancy here in these opinions. Oxygen in ancient rocks suggests water as far back as 4.3 billion years ago. Meteorite strikes slowly tapered off instead of abruptly ending as the current solar system configuration settled. So during that time, everything was still kind of up in the air. And then once the solar system settled, then the meteor strikes started to taper off as far as Earth is concerned, because we had Jupiter there. Jupiter takes the brunt of a lot of these asteroidal impacts. And so if that's the case, then yeah, the solar system must have been configured already. And no one knows for sure when exactly it was configured, obviously. Otherwise, we could answer all these questions. It's not complete. This is a quote from Elizabeth Bell from UCLA, and it kind of encapsulates a lot of what the contending argument is, which is it's not completely out of the question that there would have been a habitable world and life of some kind. And they called it an Eden. The new Hadean Earth was solid, temperate, meteorite clear, and a watery world. Quote, an Eden from the very beginning. Now if you have scientists saying this stuff, it's not a gimmick. This is a big deal. Using the word Eden, first of all, it's a biblical term, right? Which is taboo in a lot of scientific circles. But not just that, conditions for modern people and people, like animals from now to back then, it in theory could have sustained that type of life from the get-go. So that is a big deal that in the scientific community, from respect, although this has been hotly debated and highly disputed by a lot of geologists, there are still a significant contingent in the scientific community that supports this stance. So right away, and the fact that it's getting published on something like Wired magazine, which is a very mainstream publication, a lot of readers. Again, I can't overstate enough how what a big deal this is. Okay, so let's go over some of the actual evidence. Now, I've separated this. There's 5 specific pieces of evidence that are proposed in the article, and I want to go over 3. I separated them into 2 groups: the blue group and the red group, right? So the blue group makes up zircons, which are they're similar to diamonds. They're formed in a similar way. They can, and once they're formed, they record everything that's ever happened to it in the time since. So it can withstand untold amounts of damage, like pressure, heat, asteroidal impact, all that stuff it can withstand. So they're the perfect time capsules. So there's we'll get into that in a second. And then the tornadic microfossils of Pilbara Craton, which is in northwest Australia, which the article centers around some of the scientists behind these microfossils, John Valley, that I mentioned earlier. So we'll go over that in a second. These other 3 pieces of evidence they're very compelling, but they are, again, not without their criticisms. So the first one I'm going to talk about from this group are the tube-like fossils in Nuvuagituk Greenstone Belt, which is in Quebec, Canada. So this belt refers to a rock formation that is a fragment of the primitive ocean floor from way back, from billions and billions of years ago, and it's considered among the oldest iron formations on Earth. I think I have a picture of it. Let's go to... Yeah, here's a picture of the formation here. And then these are some of the tubes that were growing out of these vents. So they were described as fossilized microbial cities, 4.28 billion years old. So this suggests that they are remnants of the microbial community living near a deep ocean hydrothermal vent back then. So this is interesting. 4.28 billion years ago. Again, this is supposed to be the time of a tumultuous time in Earth's history. Nothing could live. But at the same time, there's an ocean with a vent, with a hydrothermal vent, and microbes already settled at this time. So they were there to be fossilized 4.28 billion years ago. So how long did that take? So that is... You guys can read up more on the evidence. It would take, this video would be really long if I went paragraph by paragraph. But this is just a condensed form of this evidence. And then the second piece of evidence I want to suggest is graphite flakes from the Saglit block found in Labrador, Canada. So 2 of these are found in Canada, which is a very interesting part of the world. I've done like the Younger Dryas may have happened there, or may have been one of the epicenters for the Younger Dryas rather, but this goes way before the Younger Dryas. So they find these 3.95 billion year old flakes from the sedimentary rock, which is called the Sagalik block, another really primordial formation, right? And the scientists here, who are Japanese, they're not Canadian. They just went to Canada and studied. They argue that their graphite's carbon isotope ratio indicates life. And the same thing is argued in, well, all of these pieces of evidence are argued. And it has to do with carbon 12 and carbon 13. The lower, the younger, like carbon 12 is more preferable for life than carbon 13 and higher. So this ratio indicates that at some point life had to have existed for these to exist. So again, even that is disputed as well. But again, I'm presenting their argument. The third and final one of this group I want to talk about are the stromatolites from the Isua Belt, which is in southwest Greenland. Again, very close to Canada. The fossil remains of microbes 3.7 billion years old. I think I have a picture of that too. This is the one in Greenland. This is this is the actual formation. This is the Isua Belt. And then this is from the one I haven't talked about yet. So, okay. So in southwest Greenland, they find these 3.7 billion year old microbes. And the Isua Belt, again, is home to the oldest known sedimentary rocks on Earth. So the fact that they find these microbe or these fossils in the oldest known rocks ever, that is very similar to Göbekli Tepe. That we can date Göbekli Tepe because of the geological strata in which it's found. So, and that's how we know it was deliberately buried too. It's the same concept applies here. These fossils were found in this sedimentary rock, which happens to be the oldest on Earth, period. So these are the claims, and all of these claims have been deeply scrutinized by the geologists, like I said. So the two main scrutinies are A, basic chemistry can form plenty of layered structures without life. So the stromatolites could be mistaken for inorganic material. And again, I talked about how a lot of the arguments from the I guess quote mainstream or the established scientists say that, yeah, maybe you're mistaken, it's inorganic material. Yeah, it looks nice, but you might be mistaken. B, the rock formations in question have been heated and altered over the years, which may have morphed them from their original sedimentary state. So yeah, it is the oldest known sedimentary rock formation on Earth, but during that time it's been heated and reheated and bombarded and shifted around and eroded on, and it's not the original thing. So what you're studying isn't it's not as valid as you would make it to think. So those are the two main arguments that are proposed in this article. Now, the two pieces of evidence that I think are the most compelling among the bunch are zircons and the tornadic microfossils in Pilbara Craton. So let's talk about the Pilbara Craton one first, that John Valley was head of. So he found, first of all, these microfossils were found in a deposit called the Apex Chert, which is within the Pilbara Craton in northwest Australia, and this is again dated to 3.465 billion years ago. So the fossils in them are dated to such as well. So let me hold on. So this is what they look like. They look like a worm. This is very small. This is 10 nanometers here. Just this part of the whatever you want to call it, the tornado microfossil or a worm. It looks like a worm to me. And then here's a zircon here, which I'll show you guys again in a bit. So the fossils, the microfossils in the Pilbara Craton, they have an interesting story. So back in 1994, paleobiologist William Schopp from UCLA, he published his discovery of the strange He published this in 1993 and identified 11 distinct microbial taxa in the samples. So in 93, just to kick things off, he's like, whoa, look what I found. It's old. There's a lot. There's what it's highly suggestible that these things are microbes. And here you go. I published this. So a lot of people criticized him. They said, "Oh, that could be a non-biological process. You're completely mistaken," and then they just laughed him out of the room. So it took until last year that SHOP sent a sample to John Valley, who is an expert with a super sensitive instrument for measuring isotope ratios called secondary ion mass spectrometer. And there's a picture of him with it right here. This is John Valley, the legend, and this is his lab, and that's his ion spectrometer right here. So this guy is an expert in the analysis of these types of fossils. And he's a master at using this instrument. Like, not anybody can just use a secondary ion mass spectrometer. You're going to need some serious training and experience to use it. So his team, they analyze it and they find that some of the fossils had the same carbon isotope ratio as modern photosynthetic bacteria. So that's not a coincidence to overlook, right? I talked about earlier the carbon isotope ratio. And this is one of the main, when you look into it, this is one of the main arguments for an older presence of life on Earth. So there are 3 other types of fossils that had the same ratios as methane-eating or methane-producing microbes. So of the 11, there were some had the same ratio as modern bacteria, and then 3 other types had these methane-eating or methane-producing microbes. So of the 11 microbial taxa that were initially put forth by SHOP of UCLA, this guy John Valley has already identified what they were. So these isotope ratios correlate to specific species that had already been identified by SHOP. So because of where they were found in these rock formations, they are the oldest samples that look like fossils, both physically and chemically. So the physical, as far as they're concerned, the physical and the chemical evidence are there, and they're undeniable. And the only explanation is that it's over 4 billion years old, or nearly 4 billion years old, 3.5 billion to 4 billion years old. The other thing that separates, the other distinction that separates Valley's fossils from the other 3 from Canada and Greenland is that they're diverse. It's not just one specific group. There's a presence of so many different carbon isotope ratios that it suggests there was some sort of crazy complex community of primitive organisms living at the time. So it's not like a lot of people think if there was nuclear war and nuclear fallout, everything would be dead except cockroaches. Like, there was that funny, someone made that distinction. Well, it's not that there was only one solo type of primitive life. There were all kinds of life going on back then, all kinds of microbes, and this is just what's left over. Who knows if there are even bigger ones? One of the first videos I did was one of the oldest fossils found off the east coast of Siberia, or was it east coast of Australia? I think it was Australia, actually, and it looked like kind of like a crustacean type of animal, like a bottom feeder type animal or something. So maybe there were big, maybe not megafauna, which is defined as anything living that's over 100 pounds. Maybe not that big, but there was something complex enough to be, a crustacean-sized life form. So anyway, this evidence suggests that life forms must have had time to evolve into endless iterations. So there was enough time for them to form, which kind of destroys the traditional, it's a gradual, it takes billions and billions of years to get everything, all the infrastructure in before life can even before conditions can be met to host life. So all that is out the door, according to Valley. This means they must have originated even earlier than 3.5 billion years ago, and it means our oldest ancestors are very old. So that basically the diversity in John Valley's evidence is one of the weird distinctions that have yet to be explained away rather, and that's 3.5 billion years old at the very least. So let's talk about zircons. So zircon suggests there may have been life as far back as 4.1 billion years ago. Valley found zircons that suggested the planet had a crust as far back as 4.4 billion years ago. And so zircons contain silicon, oxygen, zirconium, and other elements, and they form inside magma. And they're perfect time capsules, like I mentioned earlier. So in West Australia's Jack Hills, he chipped them out, and he found these oxygen isotopes within them, and it suggests that the crystal formed from material that was altered by liquid water. So here's a picture of some of the zircon here, and you guys, I don't know if you guys can see on the video, but there are some darkened spots within this zircon here. And by the way, this is tiny. This is the size of like probably the period in the article. It says this period of a sentence. So we're talking about something very small. And this guy John Valley chipped them out himself, and he studied them. So the fact that it was altered by liquid water suggests that part of the Earth's crust had cooled, at the very least a part of it, and solidified and harbored water, at least 400 million years earlier than the earliest known sedimentary rocks. So again, we have this situation where we have to push back the timeline. If there was liquid water, there were likely entire oceans, Valley said, and other zircons that he cross-examined showed the same thing. So it's not a coincidence. The Hadean was not hell-like. There would have been at least some dry land. There were volcanoes, sure, but they were probably surrounded by oceans, and that corroborates the other evidence from Quebec about these tubes here that were formed next to these vents. Zircon suggests there may have even been life. Bell from UCLA, she analyzed the graphite embedded within a tiny 4.1 billion year old zircon crystal from the same hills that Valley found his zircon, and the graphite's blend of carbon isotopes hint at biological origin. So again, there's this question of the isotope ratio, and of course all of this has been hotly debated, guys. They've been trying to poke holes at it for a long time, but again, there are still people who deny that criticism and don't think that it's valid. So there are two camps. Bell says herself, "This is what I would consider the most secure evidence for some sort of fossil or biogenic structure," and that's all they're saying. There is some sort of biological based structure involved or alive 4.1 billion years ago at the very least. Like, so it was there to be fossilized back then, just like Göbekli Tepe was there to be buried deliberately 10,000 over 10,000 years ago, 10,700 years ago. So if what the zircons say is true, then that tells us life was everywhere always. In almost every place scientists look, they are finding evidence of life and its chemistry. It's starting to pop up. I see all the articles pop up almost on clockwork. Every other day there's something new that they discover. Far from fussy and delicate, life may have taken hold in the worst conditions imaginable. So there doesn't need to be, it's not like a Three Little Bears scenario where the porridge has to be just right, the earth has to be just right for things to work. Life finds a way, like what Jeff Goldblum said in Jurassic Park. It finds a way, it deals with it, it's great in times of adversity, and it survives. That's what it's designed to do. It finds a niche and it survives until conditions change, and then it again adjusts. So that's basically it for this article. It goes more into the article goes more into the bombardment period, but I think it has a lot to do with what we're talking about here. But I don't want to make the video like super. I don't want it to get to an hour or whatever. So let me know what you guys think in the comments, and whatever. Just keep it clean, guys. But other than that, I'm sure that you guys will have a lot of opinions on this, and you guys can even talk about other like peripheral stuff, like like I mentioned earlier about the Sumerians, and they had that story of Marduk and Tiamat. I always thought that story was so interesting. Like is that an allegory for something else, or were they really speaking truth about what happened in the solar system? Because they seem to have known all the planets and their distances from the sun. So even that alone is incredible. But they also had the wheel. They had all. Anyway, the Sumerians, that's a whole nother video. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, and I'll talk to you guys later.